The room, in most versions of the story, is underground. Nobody agrees on the exact layout. Some people put it near Area 51. Others say S4. In one telling, it is a chamber full of equipment. In another, it is just a black project facility in the desert, and the storyteller lets your imagination do the rest. But the scene usually has the same feeling. A small group of people are staring at a machine they believe can show them possible futures. Not one future. Several. A war begins in one branch. In another, it doesn't. A leader gives an order, then in the next run, he holds it back. A public disclosure happens early. Then, it happens late. Then, it never happens at all. At first, that's the part people repeat with a kind of amazement. The machine supposedly gives choices. It lets insiders test a future before the rest of the world even knows a choice is being made. Then, the story changes. The operators keep adjusting the inputs, but the outcomes start bending toward the same point. Not every detail. Not every road. The road changes. The people change. The headlines change. The endpoint doesn't. In the darker retellings, they try bigger changes. They move political pieces. They test interventions that should send history somewhere else. They ask the machine again. And again, the future comes back to the same place. This is the part of Project Looking Glass that turned it from another Area 51 rumor into something bigger. It wasn't only a story about a secret device. It was a story about the people who supposedly had the device realizing they may have reached the edge of what power can do. The claim is easy to overstate, so let's be careful. There is no public proof that a temporal-viewing machine existed. What we have is a trail of interviews, reposted transcripts, old forum discussions, paranormal radio appearances, and people retelling other people's retellings. The paper trail is thin, but the idea traveled anyway. Because the central image is strong. A classified room, a machine built for advantage, and a future event that would not move. No one in the story has to shout. No one has to say prophecy. The unsettling part is quieter than that. It's the 10th run, the 15th run. The moment when someone in the room stops looking for a better answer and starts wondering if the answer is the point.
This is Tom Mackenzie, and you're listening to Unexplained History. Tonight, we're not starting with the airplane. We're not starting with a documented military mission, even though that part is real, and we will get there. We're starting with the other looking glass, the rumored one, the one that shows up in interviews, forums, late-night radio clips, and long chains of reposted claims. And here's the problem. The story gets repeated much more cleanly than it was ever documented. So, we're going to follow it the way people actually encountered it, as a strange claim that keeps changing hands, while the mystery stays alive.
Depending on where you enter the story, Project Looking Glass is either a device, a program, a recovered technology, or a name attached to several different pieces of rumor. The phrase that keeps coming back is temporal window. That sounds precise, but it really isn't. In one version, the machine is tied to exotic physics. In another, it involves wormholes or Einstein-Rosen bridges. In another, it sits near stargate lore, recovered technology, and alleged non-human intelligence. Other tellings don't bother with the machinery. They just say the system could look at probable futures. That vagueness helped the story spread. If someone wanted physics, the story had physics. If someone wanted Area 51, it had Area 51. If someone wanted ancient technology, future humans, Majestic 12, Project Aquarius, or a buried desert facility, those doors were there too. The names gave people handles. Area 51 gave it a place. S4 gave it a locked room. Majestic 12 gave it a committee. Stargates gave it a forbidden science. And Looking Glass gave it the thing everyone could picture, even if nobody could explain it cleanly. A window. In the lore, the machine does not simply predict tomorrow like a weather model. It shows possible outcomes. Operators run scenarios. They compare branches. They ask what happens if a war starts here, if a disclosure happens there, if a leader is removed, if a secret is released, if fear is increased, if fear is lowered. That's why the claim feels less like a crystal ball and more like a classified planning tool. A normal intelligence service gathers reports, reads signals, pays informants, and builds forecasts. It still has to guess. Looking Glass, in the legend, seems to offer something closer to a rehearsal. Try the future once. Watch the result. Change the premise. Try again. You can see why that would be tempting. If a future branch leads to panic, avoid it. If one path buys time, take it. If the public is going to react badly, manage the release. If a war creates one outcome and peace creates another, test both before anyone knows the options were on the table. This is where the story gets uncomfortable without needing much embellishment. If someone could test the future, then someone could also choose between futures. And if someone had been choosing, the world outside the room might not be as accidental as it feels. Now, that doesn't prove the device existed. It explains why people kept sharing the idea. The claim turns ordinary confusion into something arranged. Scandals, wars, disclosures, delays, maybe they are not random. Maybe somebody saw the branches first. Here is where it gets messy. The story rarely comes with a clean source. It arrives as a clip from an interview, a paragraph copied into a forum, a summary on a paranormal site, a transcript that may or may not match what was originally said. People quote the quote of the quote. Each retelling gets a little smoother. By the time most listeners meet Project Looking Glass, the weak joints have been sanded down. The way these claims moved is important. A listener might hear Burisch on an interview, then find a transcript on a site with broken images and old navigation links. Later, a paragraph from that transcript gets copied into a forum thread without the original context. A year later, someone else would quote the forum as if it were the primary source. By then, the rough edges were gone. The hesitation in the interview was gone. The missing citation was gone. What remained was a clean sentence. Looking Glass showed all timelines converging. Clean sentences travel faster than messy evidence. Something had shifted, and the people running the system may have realized the future was not as passive as they hoped.
That's the part I keep coming back to. If this were just a claim about secret hardware, it would be strange enough. But the real hook is the use case. Who gets to run the scenarios? Who gets to decide which future is acceptable. And if the public never sees the choices, how would we even know what was avoided or what was caused?
The early phase of the Looking Glass legend sounds almost administrative. That may be why it works. The operators are not described as mystics waiting for visions. They are described more like analysts, technicians, or planners. They change one variable. They watch the result. They compare it to the last run. One imagined file has a war starting earlier. Another delays it. One branch includes public disclosure. Another keeps the information buried. A leader survives in one version and disappears from the board in another. The machine supposedly shows probability. The word probability leaves room. At first, the future still feels negotiable. One path carries risk. Another buys time. A third creates backlash. People repeat this part because it sounds like something a government might want. Not magic for its own sake. Leverage, planning, and a way to make the next crisis arrive on friendlier terms. If you knew a small action could create a large result, you would know where to push. If you knew a public panic would happen in 3 months, you could seed the explanation now. If you knew a leak was coming, you could release a partial truth first and make the rest look unstable. Again, we're in claimed territory. The evidence is not a declassified memo. It's a culture of testimony and repetition. But you can see why the idea sticks. It gives a pattern to public life when public life already feels arranged. Why did that story break when it did? Why did that secret come out in pieces? Maybe none of that has anything to do with a machine. Maybe it's just politics, intelligence work, public relations, and hindsight. But Looking Glass gives people a single image for all of it. Someone behind the wall, watching branches. For a while, in the legend, the machine still feels like power. It makes history look like something a small group could study before everyone else has to live through it. Then the pattern starts. A branch that should go somewhere else comes back to the same corridor. Another scenario does the same. The operators don't panic right away, at least not in the way the story is usually told. One bad result can be blamed on bad data, a calibration error, a bad assumption, the wrong question asked in the wrong way. So they ask again. They widen the scenario. They narrow it. They remove one factor, add another, and test the kind of intervention that should send the results somewhere else. The beginnings still differ. The actors differ. The public version of events differs. The deeper pattern keeps coming back. At that point, the claim starts feeling less like a miracle story and more like a failed investigation. One weird reading can be dismissed. A pattern is harder to shrug off. Picture the kind of online thread where this grew. Someone posts a clipped interview. Someone else says they remember hearing a longer version. A third person brings in 2012. Then another adds Area 51, S4, Stargates, or Majestic 12. Nobody has to invent the whole myth at once. The pieces are already on the table. People keep arguing about whether the machine was real, and in the process, the story gets cleaner. If the machine is wrong, then the tool cannot be trusted. If the machine is right, The operators have a worse problem. The fear doesn't arrive as one sudden vision. It arrives as a trend line. Ask the device. Change the premise. Ask again. Compare the result. The future is no longer a clean menu of choices. Different routes still appear. They just keep ending up in the same place.
This is where I'd be careful with the language. A believer might say, the machine proved the future was fixed. A skeptic might say, no, people are reading meaning into a story that never had a solid foundation. But either way, this is the piece that made Looking Glass feel different from a normal secret tech rumor. The frightening claim wasn't just, they can see the future. It was, they saw it repeatedly, and the answer kept coming back.
The word that shows up again and again is convergence. It sounds technical, almost dry. Two lines converge. Two roads meet. Two signals come together. Inside the Looking Glass story, it means something much less comfortable. The branches stop behaving like branches. Different timelines, supposedly created by different choices, begin collapsing toward the same outcome. That outcome changes depending on who's telling the story. One version describes a physical catastrophe, a world-damaging event, a planetary rupture, something connected to stargates, Looking Glass devices, or forces that should never have been touched. Other versions are less literal. They talk about awakening, disclosure, mass consciousness, or the collapse of an old control system. The common thread is not the shape of the event. It's the narrowing. The operators look ahead, make a change, and still find themselves approaching the same point. In one telling, they think they are looking at the end of the world. In another, they're looking at the end of their world. The end of secrecy, management, and control. This is where the story stops flattering the hidden state. Most Black Project legends give the people behind the curtain better aircraft, better weapons, better sciences, better maps. Looking Glass begins that way too. It imagines a command layer with access to time itself. Then the rumor takes that advantage away. The people who expected a mirror of their own power see something they cannot move. That idea matters because it changes the emotional direction of the story. The public is not the only group in the dark. The insiders are in the dark too, just in a more expensive room. And the room in these tellings starts to feel smaller. No protocol solves it. No better question breaks the pattern. No larger intervention produces the clean escape route. The operators keep moving pieces because that's what operators do. They are trained to plan. They are trained to believe the next version of the plan will be better. But the answer keeps returning in a shape they recognize. Here again, the sourcing is slippery. Convergence is a strong word, and strong words survive retelling. It shows up in summaries as if it were a technical finding, but much of what circulates comes through interviews and secondhand paraphrase. The claim gets repeated more clearly than it was ever documented. Still, even that uncertainty became part of the atmosphere. People would argue over whether the date was literal, whether the event was physical, whether the machine had been shut down, whether the insiders were trying to stop a catastrophe or prevent an awakening. The argument kept the story alive. The old web matters here. These stories did not spread in one clean documentary package. They moved through message boards with usernames, broken archives, old navigation links, mirrored pages, and radio shows where half answers opened more doors. Try to trace one claim backward, and you often found another summary, not a source. That made the story frustrating. It also made it feel alive. A hidden device shows many paths. The paths begin to narrow. Then they point toward the same event. And now the question is no longer only what the machine saw. The question is what the people in the room did after they believed they had seen it.
I keep thinking about the first person who would have had to say it out loud. Not the person on a message board years later. Not the person doing an interview after the story has become lore. The first person in the room, looking at the results, saying, maybe the problem isn't the input. Maybe this is the answer.
There is a date that keeps orbiting Project Looking Glass. December 21st, 2012. By the time Looking Glass stories found a wider audience, that date already had a whole mythology attached to it. The Mayan calendar, cable television countdowns, internet jokes about the apocalypse, people making fun of the end of the world, while also, maybe, checking the sky a little more often than usual. Project Looking Glass did not create that atmosphere. It entered it. And once it did, the legend had a calendar. A date changes the way people hear a claim. A vague future event can drift forever. A date makes people gather around it. It creates countdown posts, radio segments, forum threads, predictions, denials, follow-up explanations. This is where Dan Burisch enters many versions of the story. Supporters present Burisch as a microbiologist connected to secret work near Area 51. His claims move through interviews, transcripts, paranormal research circles, old websites, and summaries copied from one place to another. They are not official records. They are not cleanly verified government documents. But they became one of the main bridges between Looking Glass, Stargate lore, alleged future humans, and the 2012 convergence. In some interview clips, the appeal is not the polish. It is the opposite. People pause, correct themselves, reach for names, jump from one classified label to another, and leave the listener doing half the organizing. That roughness can make a claim feel less scripted, even when it also makes it harder to verify. A polished official document invites one kind of trust. A messy insider story invites another. And this is where it gets messy. In the Burisch-linked material, Looking Glass is not sitting alone. It sits inside a larger cluster of claims, stargates, alleged beings called J-Rods, S4, Project Aquarius, secret oversight groups, and damaged timelines. The J-Rods are described in some accounts as future humans, or altered descendants, connected to damaged future branches. The labels shift. Sometimes the retelling sounds more confident than the source it came from. But the basic shape is recognizable. Looking Glass devices could look across probable futures. Stargate technology could open or disturb passages through space-time. Future beings became witnesses from branches, where humanity had already paid a price. In the darkest version, the danger is not only that insiders saw a bad future. The danger is that the devices themselves may have helped create it. That is a different kind of problem. The machine is no longer just a warning instrument. It may be part of the catastrophe it reveals. Some Burisch-linked accounts describe a threshold around December 21st, 2012. Beyond that point, the devices allegedly can no longer produce usable information. Or the timelines converged. Or every attempt to see around the event fed back into the event itself. The details are not stable from one telling to the next. But the feeling is stable. The operators are not just seeing a political shift. They are seeing a break in the world and possibly evidence that their own forbidden science helped bend the world toward that break. The alleged future beings matter because they give the catastrophe a witness. A machine can show an image. A future human can say, "We came from the consequence." That does not make the testimony reliable. It does explain why people kept repeating it. The future becomes evidence. The present becomes the place where the damage may still be happening. And the operators are no longer just observers. This is also where the legend becomes hard to hold in one clean shape. A few versions speak as if the catastrophe was literal. Others suggest two broad timelines, one more damaged and one more survivable. In other accounts, the devices were shut down because continuing to use them made the outcome worse. That last piece is important because it flips the usual disaster logic. Usually, the answer is more information, more power, more prediction, more control. In Looking Glass lore, more use of the machine may deepen the trap. People build systems to predict risk. Then they change their behavior because of the prediction. Then that behavior creates new risks. Markets do it. Governments do it. Media systems do it. Military planners do it. Looking Glass turns that feedback loop into a time story. The future is observed. The observers change. They act differently. Their action feeds the outcome they feared. By the time 2012 arrives in the lore, the question is no longer only what the machine saw. It is whether looking made the vision heavier. There is another reason this branch lasted. It gave people a way to keep the dread without admitting a failed deadline. The calendar could pass. The prediction could change clothes. The claim could become less about a date on a wall and more about a transition people thought they were already living through. The Burisch-linked material had the right shape for late-night radio and message boards. It had all the pieces people were already primed to connect. Area 51. Future humans. A forbidden machine. A date that already felt loaded. The evidence chain was thin, but the atmosphere was strong.
And this is the part where I think you have to hold two thoughts at the same time. The source trail is messy. A lot of this comes through interviews, summaries, and reposted material. But messy does not mean meaningless. It shows how the story spread. People weren't only sharing a claim. They were sharing a mood that some deadline was approaching and somebody, somewhere, had already seen it.
Then there is the other version. This one travels through Bill Wood, also known as William Brockbrader, and through later retellings of his interviews. Brockbrader's claims have been repeated, challenged, clipped, debated, and rearranged across the internet. That matters. We are not dealing with a clean archive. We are dealing with testimony culture, videos, fragments, comments, believers, skeptics, and people trying to reconstruct what was actually said years after the fact. So the phrasing has to stay careful. In this version, the central discovery is still convergence. The machine still shows timelines narrowing. The people running it still reach a point they cannot easily work around. But the meaning changes. It is not necessarily the end of the world. It is the end of their world. That phrase became one of the reasons this branch of the story survived after 2012 came and went. If the planet did not end, the story could move. The apocalypse could shift from physical destruction to the collapse of a control system. For believers, that made the claim feel less veiled and more subtle. Maybe the date was never about fire in the sky. Maybe it was about the point when old methods stopped working the way they used to. In this telling, the people inside the system panic because Looking Glass shows that their influence has an expiration date. They can delay, distract, create fear, move information around, keep the public inside a managed version of reality for a while. But after the convergence, the old tools stop working at the same scale. The public begins to see too much. Sometimes this sounds like disclosure. Sometimes it sounds like spiritual awakening. Sometimes it sounds like the internet itself breaking the old spell. The hidden architecture becomes visible. The commands still function, but they no longer produce the same obedience. For the people repeating this version, that is the hopeful part. The machine does not show doom. It shows the end of an old arrangement. Here is the problem, though. A flexible prophecy is hard to test. If someone says the world will physically end on a date, and the next morning arrives, the claim has a problem. If the event can become symbolic, spiritual, political, psychological, or hidden, the story can survive almost anything. Skeptics see that as the escape hatch. Believers see it as the mystery. And the Looking Glass story keeps moving because it can hold both interpretations. If you fear catastrophe, it gives you catastrophe. If you fear control, it gives you control ending. If you fear that nothing you do matters, it offers a strange kind of comfort. The larger direction may have already turned. The suspicion underneath this version is quieter than the usual conspiracy image. It is not that hidden rulers are calm and omnipotent. It is that they may be improvising too. They have better rooms, better equipment, better maps, but even they can reach the edge of the map. That is a very human fear, which may be why this part works so well. The people behind the curtain are not gods. They are people with access, people with files, people with systems. And in this version, the systems start returning answers they don't like.
What I find interesting is how this version almost turns the whole thing inside out. The scary version says they saw disaster. The hopeful version says they saw their own control slipping. Neither version gives us solid proof, but both explain why people kept passing the story around. It gave shape to a feeling a lot of people already had, that something was changing, and the official language was always arriving late.
By the time the story reaches modern retellings, the technical claims often matter less than the pattern underneath them. People hold on to the catastrophic branch because the world feels physically fragile. Others hold on to the awakening branch because the world feels morally exhausted. Both versions use the same machine to say different things. One says humanity mishandled forces it barely understood. The other says the managers of reality lost their ability to manage belief. This is the late-night poll of Project Looking Glass. It asks you to imagine a private crisis inside the control room. A crisis that would never appear in public records. The people outside the room feel something changing. The people inside the room may have seen it first.
And maybe that's the most unsettling version. Not that someone saw the future like a movie, but that someone saw enough to understand they could not steer it.
Now the story changes. Because there really was a looking glass. Not a publicly proven temporal window. Not a verified stargate device. Not a confirmed machine for inspecting branching futures. The documented looking glass was a Cold War military mission. And it is worth feeling the shift. For most of this episode, Looking Glass has been a rumor about time. Now it becomes a record about command. Operation Looking Glass began on February 3rd, 1961, under Strategic Air Command. Its purpose was terrifying in a very practical way. If Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base were destroyed or cut off during a nuclear war, an airborne command post would remain alive in the sky. The name was literal. The aircraft mirrored the underground command post. It was a duplicate command center, built so the chain of command could keep functioning after the ground had been hit. For almost 3 decades, the mission maintained continuous airborne alert. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. An aircraft was up, ready to serve as a survivable command post if the worst happened. The aircraft associated with the mission included customized C-135 and EC-135 platforms. Inside were communication systems, battle staff positions, and the equipment needed to connect surviving authorities to nuclear forces. The broader system tied into post-attack command control concepts and airborne launch control capabilities. Pause on that phrase for a second. Airborne launch control. If ground-based launch control centers were destroyed or disabled, aircraft could help transmit launch commands to missile forces. This was not science fiction. This was the machinery of nuclear continuity. The real Looking Glass did not look forward through time. It looked down at a world that might already be ending, and tried to preserve command over what came next. The official history is frightening enough without adding a temporal device. The practical details of the real mission are almost mundane, which makes them more unnerving. Crews had checklists. Radios had frequencies. The aircraft needed fuel, maintenance, rotations, spare parts, trained officers, and people awake at bad hours waiting for messages they hope would never come. A myth can float above the ground. This part had tires, hangars, radios, and men climbing into an airplane because the country had built a plan for after the unthinkable. Picture the aircraft in the sky during the Cold War. Below it, cities sleep. Missile fields wait under snow and prairie grass. Submarines move through black water. Radar stations watch the horizon for the first sign that the unthinkable has started. Inside the aircraft, people train for the moment when ordinary national life has already failed. Their job in that moment is not to prevent catastrophe. Their job is to keep orders moving through it. This was the documented reality behind the name. And once you know that, the folklore makes more sense. It doesn't become proven. It becomes more understandable. The real world already had an aircraft in the sky for the worst-case scenario. It already had classified rooms, command mirrors, post-attack planning, and a name that sounded like it belonged in a myth. The rumor moved the idea from command and control into time itself.
This is the part that grounds the whole episode for me. The real Looking Glass does not prove the Project Looking Glass legend. It doesn't verify Burisch, or Brockbrader, or the J-rods, or the temporal window claims. But it does explain the soil the legend grew in. A real classified program with an almost perfect name. A real nuclear mission built around surviving the end. A real command system most Americans would never see. It doesn't prove the rumor, but it explains why people kept asking what else might have been behind the door.
If the world ended, someone would still be in the sky giving orders. From there, the myth only had to ask one more question. What if they were not just preparing for the end? What if they had seen it coming? So by the end, we have to keep two things separate. The documented Operation Looking Glass belongs to the Cold War record. It had aircraft, crews, communication systems, procedures, mission histories, and a clear purpose inside the nuclear command structure. The temporal Project Looking Glass belongs to a different world. Interviews, forums, reposted transcripts, paranormal radio, conspiracy research, and later retellings that often sound more certain than the sources underneath them. Those are not equal evidence. But they are connected by fear. Both versions begin with the same basic anxiety. Somewhere beyond public view, systems exist for the moment the ordinary world fails. The official program asked a practical question. If nuclear war destroys the ground, how does command survive in the air? The legend asks a stranger one. If the people in charge could see what was coming, what would they do when they realized they couldn't change it? Maybe the alleged event was imagined as catastrophe. Maybe it was later reinterpreted as awakening, disclosure, or the collapse of an old order. Maybe the temporal window story is what happens when Cold War secrecy, Area 51 folklore, and 2012 anxiety all get mixed together. The evidence does not let us treat those possibilities the same way. But the story keeps circulating because it touches something real. People know decisions are made in rooms they will never enter. They know governments build systems for emergencies the public is not invited to imagine. They know the official record often arrives late after rumor has already filled the space. Project Looking Glass lives in that space. Somewhere in a museum, a real EC-135 sits silent. Its mission is over. Its consoles no longer wait for the message that would mean the world had crossed the line. That aircraft was built to keep command alive after catastrophe. The legend that borrowed its name tells a rougher story. In that version, the hidden world looks ahead and sees control, slipping away. Maybe no one saw the end of the world. Maybe no machine ever opened a window into time. But the question underneath the legend is harder to retire. What happens if the people who claim to manage events find out the next event will not take orders?
Project Looking Glass may never be proven. But I understand why people return to it. It's not only the machine. It's the suspicion that someone behind the curtain saw the limit before the rest of us did. And if they did, I doubt they'd announce it. They'd close the door and keep looking. I'm Tom Mackenzie. This has been Unexplained History.